Hello, good morning. Welcome to Sunday morning coffee with Dr. Childress here today. So, today I thought I would just kind of talk about the broad overview of where we stand right now, where I kind of stand right now, where you kind of stand right now in the family courts. I've already provided a couple of fireside chats where I've spoken about the petition to the APA and then the AFCC presentation that I made with Dorsey Pruder back in 2017. And I'm going to continue to do those. So during the week, you'll get a different series about some different event or thing that occurred out to Dr. Childress in Wonderland of the family courts. Uh, and I thought what I'd do today is take sort of a 60,000 foot view of where we stand and what I'm doing in the family courts. So I'll be rambling about this and that today on my coffee talk. I was thinking about all the various domains that I want to cover. And I think next week I'm going to cover the 2019 presentation I made with Dorsey Pruder to the American Psychological Association about the high road single case ABA data that we generated. The that is a very very interesting situation because that's the only case I've ever accepted or had from Dorsey. So we both lived in Southern California, but we never interacted at that level, except on one case. 15-year-old young man, targeted parent mom, allied parent dad, and went through the high road. Dorsey recovered him. And then she asked me to be the follow up care, maintenance care therapist for the family. And so Dorsey, uh, when her people go through her workshop, she uses the parent-child relationship rating scale that I developed. So it's 3 items rated on a 1 to 7. 4 is kind of just there, but it's basically the 3 items: affection, cooperation, and social involvement on a 1 to 7 scale, rated by the targeted parent. And so she uses the parent child relationship rating scale that I developed as an outcome measure for all her workshops. So she gets the recovery. See, she sees we got data, or she has data on all of her recoveries. The What I did was when the 15-year-old and mom got to me, I just continued to keep those ratings. So mom would just send me the parent-child relationship rating scale ratings in an email every day, and I'd put them into an Excel file. And I have 2 weeks. The second A phase is the first 2 weeks of my treatment, and so there's 2 sessions of my therapy in there. Oh my goodness, there's like 12 little circled numbers on the data points on that second A because my therapy was very interesting what I did. But equally, or maybe more, I don't know. I can't tell which is more impressive. Is Dorsey's B phase, where she goes from 1s and 2s to 5s and 6s on the ratings in 2 days. So the targeted parent is saying the child is coming in awful, awful 1s and 2s on all three items: affection, cooperation, social involvement. And at the end of 2 days, they're 5s and 6s based on the ratings of the targeted parent. Holy Toledo, that's phenomenal. And then once you understand what I was doing after that, it's like, holy cow, how does Dr. Childress do stuff that like ripples across days in the child, and he's synchronizing, attachment with emotional regulation and stuff. So that's really impressive data. And some things about that is I, because I'm the follow-up care therapist, I got like the documentation, continuity of care documentation on this kid. And he had been diagnosed, his family had been diagnosed by three different mental health people as child psychological abuse. Three psychologists diagnosed child psychological abuse, and yet it takes the court 3 years to act to protect the child. That's something. Holy Toledo. Why did it take the court 3 years to act in that? And so that's a whole interesting thing. And then when we went back to present to the APA, there was a campaign launched by someone to prevent us from presenting to the APA. They wanted the APA to rescind our uh, offer for the presentation to them. And so the APA contacted me and said, "What's going on with all these people who want us to rescind your offer and stuff?" And I said, "I'm in the family courts and da da da." And they said, "Well, we agree with academic freedom, so we're not gonna rescind your offer based on people claiming upset, but we'd like you to submit your paper for peer review prior to doing that." So that's fine with me. So thank you, monkeys. We got a peer reviewed on Dorsey Pruder's data. So it's been peer reviewed, presented to the APA that the High Road workshop is effective in recovering children from trauma. And interestingly, it's a 2-day High Road workshop instead of the normal 4-day High Road. Why is that? Because I was presenting over in Netherlands and Dorsey was flying over to join me over there in some of the presentation and stuff over there. And she only had 2 days when the court order came through. So she adapted the High Road program from a 4-day workshop to a 2-day workshop. So what you're looking at is like she's winging it on the fly. She is so good at what she does that it's just amazing. So I'll talk about that next week and all the ins and outs of that protocol or that presentation. Uh, then another thing, that I figure I'd be talking about is the stuff around the forensic psychologists and a little bit on the petition to the APA, because the petition to the APA was like a little um, uh, finder kind of. I put it in there, and then whoever it gets passed to is going to be the pathway that is disabling the mental health system. So where did it get stuck? And what they did is they APA gave it over to a committee. And the first petition to the APA by the parents before the one I wrote was given to a committee to study the research Susan Deutsch on her Vita describes how she is like the co-chair of this committee to study the research regarding the family courts. And so it went to Susan Deutsch. And the first petition, I suspect the second one did too. And we just need to like get confirmation that because then we're going to ask, hopefully, Susan Deutsch and that committee. It's been like years now. What have you found about the literature? Now, they put up when they first formed the committee, they put up an invitation for everybody to, join the committee. It's what you have to do is, an APA, you have to put out a broad invitation. But they were already chose their buddies and they knew that they were just doing it like a formality. Well, Dr. Childress is out here. So I submitted and said, I'd like to be on this committee to study the research. And oh my goodness, look at my 40-page reference list for foundations. And if you're going to look at the research on the family courts, they're going to be looking at family systems research and attachment research and personality disorder. Oh my goodness, you're looking basically at all the research in psychology. So it was a fraud from the get-go. And so, what I'll ask for is what you've got a committee from the APA, been working on this for 5 years. So, what are the minutes from the meetings? How many times did you meet? Do you have agendas? What is the list of research that you reviewed? How did you select the research? Or did you just do nothing? And there's your negligence. Okay, they were given this, and interestingly, though, a few years later, this somewhere out of somewhere comes up these new guidelines for forensic psychology proposal, um, that are basically the same as the old guidelines, and I did a line by line workup on them, put them up on my website. So I think Susan Deutsch and the forensic psychologists took their little committee opportunity as a way of boostering their vitas with this new guidelines for forensic psychology. So we'll see what happens with that. But that's interesting. I want to kind of look at that. And I want to look at forensic psychologists' vitas. So that'll be another little piece. I'm going to do like vitas all around because it's so interesting who's over here. We should look and see who's available. Who are the real big experts in the family courts? So we have Burnett, and so we'll look at his vita. He's a psychiatrist. He's an MD physician, trained about 1968, and then he was in psych hospitals for a little bit. As a psychiatrist, kind of organizing things, it looked like. And then he's been mostly in the family courts doing parental alienation, big advocate for parental alienation. So we'll take a look at that. And then we'll look at Linda Gottlieb, and we'll look at social worker, again, for been in family courts the entire time. Got her social work degree in about 1968, and as far as I can tell, hasn't had any additional coursework or training since then. And she's an expert in parental alienation, but I'm not seeing that she's an expert in anything else. So as soon as parental alienation goes away, I'm not sure why she's just not a random social worker. And then we'll take a look at, but particularly we want to look at the forensic psychologist vitas. So one I took a look at was Matthew Sullivan. Now, he was a former president of the AFCC, and he worked with Susan Deutsch on coming up with Overcoming Barriers, which was another 4-day workshop type intervention that was offered to the courts for a while, but it was completely ineffective, as would be anticipated it would be, because it's a psychotherapeutic approach, and there's no psychotherapeutic 4-day approach to anything. So that's not going to work. What Dorsey does and what Rorschach and Randy Rand do with Family Bridges, they're based kind of on the same approach. It's a psychoeducational workshop, and it's not based on anything like we do in psychotherapy. So, but the forensic psychologists wanted their own 4-day workshop to be in competition with Dorsey, I guess. So instead of asking Dorsey, hey, what do you do, and finding out and learning what she does, they just came up with their own idea, offered it up to the courts. Complete failure. And now it's out of business. It's defunct. So I wanted to take a look at these vitas of who these people are that are over here. So I selected Matthew Sullivan for my blog, and I did 2 blogs on Matthew Sullivan's vita, just kind of walking through what it looks like. And then I did a blog on Dorsey Pruder's vita. And I got to tell you, Dorsey Pruder's got a stronger vita in the family courts than Matthew Sullivan, who's president of the AFCC. And you can go to my blogs and you can look at the two and take a look at them side by side and say, who has the strongest vita as a professional in the family courts? It's Dorsey. She's been actually recovering people successfully, and Overcoming Barriers was a failure, and the forensic psychologist is a failure. And so, and then you look at his vita, and it's really, really thin. And that's what I describe the forensic psychologist vitas as. I call them puffy vitas because they do a lot of stuff to make them seem puffier. They go presentation here, or they write these opinion pieces for articles. You see a lot of opinion pieces for articles written, or presentations, or committees, or stuff. All this puff, but no work experience. They haven't worked with ADHD or autism or attachment pathology or eating disorders or substance abuse or nothing else. They haven't worked with nothing except forensic custody evaluations in the family courts. So that's where it's a puffy vita, but it's very thin. And then you compare that over to my Vita, and that's what a clinical psychologist, a working Vita looks like. You'll see I was at UCLA on schizophrenia, then I'm over at Jim Swanson on ADHD, and then I'm out in San Bernardino on attachment trauma, and even on the FEMA and DOJ working for juvenile fire centers. And I've got autism background in there too. So I've got a whole bunch of actual working experience with a lot of different stuff that then I brought into the family courts. So there's two different kinds of vitas here. Um, and so I want to take a look at these forensic vitas. And so we'll probably take a look at Robin Deutsch's vita, and just take a look at and see who she is, because she's a big kahuna. She's like in forensic psychology. She is. She's on all these committees, and she was even on the chair of the APA ethics code. Interestingly, I wonder what her span of service on the APA ethics code. I wonder if it was coinciding with when the APA petition to the APA went in there. I wonder if she was the chair of the APA ethics committee at the time. Who knows? Well, but that'll be all interesting information to find out. That's why I'm hoping for like a class action lawsuit that gets discovery on all these people. No matter what happens, that'd be a nice thing to do, because you get discovery on the AFCC, you get discovery on the APA, you get discovery on the license, you get discovery on everybody, which would be helpful. Even if you later drop a few off, you reach some compromise solutions with the APA and the licensing boards for some corrective actions, and they get dropped off the lawsuit. You just keep the AFCC on there because they took responsibility for the practice. By when you put out guidelines for how to do something, then you're kind of responsible for that thing, and you put your imprimatur of credibility onto the practice of forensic custody evaluations. So now, when the Blue Ribbon Commission out of New York says these are worthless, they lack scientific and professional validity, they're harmful to children, they're dangerous, well, you're the organization that put your credibility on the line for this. You said, here are the guidelines for how to do these worthless, invalid, dangerous assessments. And you have to do them because the forensic psychologists are a subspecialty practice just for you. So they're the only ones that work in the family courts, and the clinical psychologists come over, they sanction us on the licensing boards to drive us away. So you're forced to use this really substandard group of people who are just exploiting you for your money, $20,000 to $40,000, and they just abandon you, and they just go through family after family. Ask any of the families who've been through. They just do their stuff. One custody evaluation. Then sometimes they'll do a second custody evaluation by the same one 2 years later because it didn't solve anything. Reunification therapy that they're kind of incestuously involved in, doing a custody evaluation here and reunification therapy elsewhere. It's no such thing as reunification therapy. And that doesn't work. So 2-3 years, they try it again. 4 years later, the child ages out, or everything crashes, the parents run out of money, and they're just tossed off to the side to their destruction. And the forensic psychologist takes the next court case off the list of court-involved psychologists. And so the whole idea that you've got a list to choose from, as opposed to being able to go out and locate anybody, the best people, instead you've got a list of people on the courts. If you can't come up with a class action on this, I don't know. But so it should be interesting. We'll look at some betas around here. Just because part of what I came over here is, holy cow, there's so many experts. Everybody's an expert over here. You don't find that actually out in clinical psychology. Jim Swanson, Keith Nectarline are super duper big experts in ADHD and schizophrenia, but they don't go around saying, I'm an expert. They're just normal psychologists who are doing their job. And that's what it's considered in clinical psychology. It's not expert, it's competence. The the standard for competence that I was trained to at Children's Hospitals of Los Angeles and that I worked at Children's Hospital of Orange County, and the standard for competence that I trained my postdocs to and my interns to is competence means knowing everything there is to know about the pathology, and then you read journals to stay current. That's the expectation with Jim Swanson. That was the expectation with Keith Nectarline. That was the expectation at children's hospitals. When you're working with the physician team at children's hospitals, you're expected to know everything there is to know about that pathology and then be reading journals on the cancer issues or spina bifida issues or whatever to remain current on what the issues are. That's the standard for competence with doctors, to know everything there is to know. And that's why we're doctors. It's like, holy cow, we know a lot of stuff. I walk come over here, and these people are not even close to competence. They don't know attachment. They don't know family systems. They don't know delusional thought disorder. They don't know nothing. And yet they're claiming to be experts. Well, it's because the pathology captivated them on their narcissism and their grandiosity and entitlement. And then the court feeds that because it calls them expert witnesses. And all it takes is their opinion. Everybody they can get to come in and their opinion is just all it takes. So they get kind of inflated on their own self importance. So, no, what I'm working towards, I'm the last of the experts, the last airbender or whatever. So the age of experts is over. I'm kind of the last one, and I'm just a conduit to the knowledge. Okay. I'm not really an expert in my eyes. I'm basic competence. If you don't know as much as Dr. Childress, if you're a professional and you don't know as much as Dr. Childress does about this pathology in the family courts, why not? Are you just lazy? Because you must be, because I know it. And so you're just kind of lazy, and or maybe you just don't think you need to know knowledge to do what you do. And I believe that because I've seen what you do, and there's obviously no knowledge applied in it. So, but you do need knowledge to work with these children. In fact, you need a lot of it. These are very vulnerable families. It's a very involved pathology. It's not necessarily complex. It's kind of simplistic, but there's just a lot of moving parts to it: the personality pathology, attachment pathology, family system stuff. But once you see the patterns, it's like all the time. It just replicates the same patterns associated with it. So yeah, so we'll talk about more about the forensic psychologists and my interactions with them, ways I've kind of sent information into the system to kind of mark the path that it traveled within the system and to who it traveled to, because that then we're going to have one accountability. Where did it travel to, and what happened with this stuff? Another interesting little story I can give you is about when the time Gene Mercer was brought out to California by a minors' council to testify in a case against my report. When I was a court ordered psychologist, I was court ordered to conduct a clinical psychological assessment for the family. And I did, so this whole little thing of the booklet here, yeah, the assessment of attachment related pathology surrounding divorce, that I did that 6 sessions, came up, did that little session, came up with my diagnosis. And then the minors' council imported Gene Mercer from out of state to argue against my conclusions or whatever. And she like slandered my reputation. and made misrepresentations to the court. And I've got it documented um, on the transcript of her testimony. And because of what she said, I wrote her a letter, standard 1.04 of the APA Ethics Code, informal notification regarding possible ethical violations in violation of California state law, holding herself out as a psychologist when she's never been licensed and is not currently licensed, never qualified to be licensed. So, and then she blogged about the letter I sent to her saying, oh, it's nonsense. So it's obvious she doesn't really, is not concerned at all with ethical standards. Interestingly, on Jean Mercer, on 2017, when she attacked the CE units of the AFCC presentation, CE units are required for licensed psychologists. Jean Mercer doesn't have to get CE units for anything because she's never been licensed. So she's attacking the licenses on something she's not vulnerable to. There's no way I could file all sorts of licensing board complaints against Jean Mercer for practice beyond competence and all sorts of stuff. The problem is she's not licensed. She has no licensing board. Oh my goodness. So it's like, and then she files a licensing board complaint against me for unprofessional practice. She's manipulating the fact that licensed psychologists have to have standards where she doesn't have to. And so she's an interesting character. So we'll talk about her coming out to California because that's interesting. Because I actually did the diagnosis on this, and so she didn't. And so it's interesting situation that involved. Kind of related to that, I was not involving Jean Mercer, but I was also asked one time to do a court-ordered assessment for a family. These parents get me to come in on a court-ordered assessment for family, and so I flew into the city, and I met with the targeted parent for about an hour and a half, and I met with the child for about an hour, a little under an hour, and that was it. That's what I needed to get the diagnosis of the shared persecutory delusion, because I did a mental status exam with thought and perception. I popped the delusion out and I saw it with the mom, and I confirmed that the child shared the delusion. And the court order for me to do the assessment was the opposing counsel got the court reporter inserted. So I had a court reporter there during my two assessment interviews, which I love. If I ever am invited to do another mental status exam, to actually come out and somewhere, I don't travel, but if I would ever come out and do a mental status exam in a family court situation, I would absolutely want a court reporter present, because I want that transcript of what I do, because it allowed me, with that transcript, it allowed me to show exactly where the delusion was and how I uncovered it. And you can just walk it on through the linear logical reasoning, and boop, it just goes sideways. And so that's great to have a court reporter present. And but this is not all. The opposing counsel got the court order that the opposing counsel could be in my interview or my clinical interviews with the mother. Oh, what? I'm conducting a clinical interview with the mother and her attorney. Okay, so I told the attorney right off the bat, he says, okay, you don't understand what I'm doing here, so I need you to be quiet and not mess with my clinical interview. Okay, so shh, you can sit and watch and stuff, but you don't know what I'm doing as a clinical psychologist, so shh. He didn't shh at all. He was totally intruding, disrupting, all sorts of, and it's like I got documented transcript on that. So that's great on just this stuff. So I got all these very interesting stories about coming over to the family courts. The another element that I want to talk about, though, in addition to just the stories about being over here in Wonderland, is just give you some background on the instruments that you have available to you. So, the diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting. Now, this is really, really simple. You can write the answers on a napkin. The first one is a child rejecting a normal range parent? Easy peasy. Now, the reason it's so like wordy here is that's called an operational definition for the clinician and for research. Because this is going to be a really wonderful thing for defining who your population is in the research. What's parental alienation? How do we know? There's no way to know who's, if we can now define the population who we're doing the research on. So this is called an operational definition for the is a child rejecting a normal range parent. But then the question becomes, what's a normal range parent? Well, okay, I got the parenting practices rating scale for that. So you rate the targeted parent, and this is abusive range on page 1. Are they abusive? Or are they just really bad, almost abusive? Or are they normal range, the problematic, but it's normal? Or are they normal range and healthy? These two here are normal range parents. This one and the abusive parent would be considered abusive range parent. So identify what the parenting of the targeted parent is. Are they a normal range parent? If they are a normal range parent, then is a child rejecting a normal range parent? That's an impossible symptom. It never happens. Prevalence is 0. So if that's present, this is the pathology because it never happens. But I don't just rely on one symptom because they're kind of stupid. So I gave them 3 to kind of confirm the issues. And so the second one has to do with protest behavior. And that's drawn from Bowlby's second volume on separation, anxiety, and anger. And so the 2 protest behavior are anger and anxiety. The operational definition for the anger high protest is 5 specific narcissistic symptoms. The reason I chose 5 is that's the cutoff criteria for a narcissistic personality disorder in the DSM-5. And so the idea that a child has a narcissistic personality disorder is just not tenable. That just doesn't happen. People don't develop personality disorders till adulthood. In childhood, what later becomes a personality disorder looks like attachment pathology. So for a child to have 5 narcissistic personality traits, especially absence of empathy and splitting, those 2 are the big ones. And to see those in a child, there's only one possible cause. The child is being manipulated by a parent who has those traits. And so the child is acquiring those attitudes, the haughty and arrogant attitude, judgment of the other parent, absence of empathy, cruelty, splitting, all that stuff. The child is acquiring it from the pathological parent. So I call diagnostic indicator 2 the psychological fingerprints of control. So it's the fingerprints of psychological control of the child by a parent. We cannot psychologically control a child without leaving evidence of that in the child's symptoms. So that's what I do is I lift the evidence of that psychological control. And the high anger one protest is operationally defined as narcissistic personality symptoms. Then there's also another variant, primarily borderline variant, and oftentimes with young children, so 4, 5, 6-year-olds with a strong borderline mom, you'll see a high anxious presentation. And in that one, you may not see the narcissistic symptoms because you got a young child and a borderline mom who's more moving on the abandonment fears than the rejection stuff. And so what you'll see, though, is a really elevated anxiety that meets diagnostic criteria for a specific phobia. It's a mother phobia or a father phobia. But that's also unrealistic. You never see a mother phobia or father phobia. Prevalence of that is 0. Google it. You Google, all the phobias you can find. There's one big list of like hundreds of different phobias. Phobia about the color white. Like there's phobias about everything. You will not find a mother phobia or a father phobia. And there's neurological reasons for that in the attachment system. So if you're finding a mother phobia or a father phobia or a narcissistic personality disorder in a child, that's diagnostic indicator two. That's just not that. Those are the fingerprints of psychological control. And then diagnostic indicator three is kind of the big one. Um, you know, which one of these is three is not like the others? And that's a persecutory delusion in the child. Does a child have a fixed and false belief that they are being malevolently treated in some way by the targeted parent? And if it's a true belief, then document it on the parenting practices rating scale. If the child actually is being malevolently treated in some way, level one or level two, document what that is. Let's put it on a treatment plan and fix it. Okay. If it's not, if the parent is a level three or level four on the parenting practices rating scale, then the child is not being malevolently treated in some way. That's a normal range parent, which then makes it a persecutory delusion. Okay. And so that's diagnostic indicator three. If you have all three of those present, a child's rejecting a normal range parent, they show 5 narcissistic personality traits and a persecutory delusion, there is only one explanation for that, which is what I describe in my book Foundations. Okay, it's a shared persecutory delusion and factitious false attachment pathology imposed on the child for secondary gain to the pathological parent of pathological narcissistic borderline dark personality parent of manipulating the court and meeting their own needs. Gosh, I hate having to say that all the time. I wish I could just say attachment based parental alienation or ABPA, but then pathogen's going to lie about that and say, oh, Dr. Childress has some sort of new theory when I don't. So eventually, hopefully, we'll get to a point where we can call it a label. Bob, brutally obstructed bonding. We can call it Bob for all I care. But can we just shorten that? Me having to say that big description every time. I'm looking forward to that. So, the diagnostic indicator, if you can just, if they will just say whether or not this is present or absent, the mental health people, then we have clarity. Because if they say, no, the child's not rejecting a normal range parent because you're a problem somehow, well, then tell me what my problem is so we can fix it. But if you're telling me I'm not a problem, then I'm not a problem and the child is rejecting me. So that's a check mark. Now you have to explain how that happens. If you have 5 narcissistic personality disorder traits in the child or phobic anxiety, you have to explain how that gets there. If you have a persecutory delusion in the child, then you're going to have to explain how all 3 of those symptoms arise. Or if it's not there, if they're saying, no, it's not a persecutory delusion, then what am I doing wrong? How am I malevolently treating my child? So it forces them to step up and we can get clarity on the symptoms. I'm a senior staff, okay, clinical director, 3 university assessment treatment center. So I got faculty and trainees out of Loma Linda in occupational therapy. I have faculty and trainees out of University of Redlands in speech and language, and I've got faculty and professional staff and interns and postdocs in psychology out of Cal State psychology program. So I've got 3 different universities sending their people to me. I know enough about occupational therapy and speech and language that I can integrate them into my psychology people and I'm early childhood stuff. And so I'm responsible for directing that. Our funding was out of Department of Behavioral Health. Our referral source was Department of Children and Family Services. And so the CPS. And so our funding out of the County Department of Behavioral Health had all sorts of paperwork guidelines, and it's county funded. And so I had to maintain that level of documentation for county types of work. Okay. Now, when I'm senior staff and come into a situation like this, walk into the family courts, holy Toledo, the mental health people are really bad. So the first thing we need to do is get standards, and I would fire all the professional staff that are currently here, because all the professional staff that are currently in the family courts are ignorant, incompetent, lazy, and unethical. Okay, so I don't want an ignorant, incompetent, lazy, and unethical psychologist on my staff. So you're fired. All the forensic psychologists, boom, you're fired. And the longer you've been here, the puffier your vita, the faster you're getting the pink slip. You're out of here. Uh, but then we're going to have to get a whole new crop of therapists in. We'll get the dialectic behavior therapists in. We'll just bring them in first, and then we'll bring in some additional support after that. But we'll get the dialectic behavior therapists in right away to replace them. They're going to have to adapt dialectic behavior therapy, DBT, for the family courts, because nobody's been here for 40 years. Okay. Everybody else in clinical psychology has got all sorts of treatments. We've been developing great treatments, and none of them have entered the family courts. And so we have to adapt our treatments to come back into the family courts. It's like the Catholic Church being accused of sex abuse, and then they cover it up. You shouldn't do that. When you get an accusation of sex abuse, you need to be like Penn State. You just need to, like, boom, open it up and say, this is what it is, and you just take the hit and do what you have to do. And that's what professional psychology needs to do right now. It needs to stop defending forensic psychologists, and just throw them under the bus and just say, yep, it was bad, and clean house, and take whatever hit you take from 40 years of unethical malpractice, and just say, yeah, we were kind of negligent and neglectful of what was happening over here, and we'll figure that out from there. But let's clean this matter up and get back on the right track. That's what needs to happen. That's what's going to happen eventually. It's If anybody knows the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, we're kind of going into a Selden crisis where it doesn't matter. Everything's narrowing down until there's only going to be one solution. And it doesn't matter who's in that spot as the president of the APA. It doesn't matter who's elected to that. They're only going to have one choice given the context that's kind of boxed them in. And so it's just a matter of how long it takes, how close to that crisis wall that we have to actually hit. And we're hitting it. Okay. I gave them 10 years and they didn't move. So we're going to hit a wall, which is going to be tough for all of you parents, because you're not going to have any treatment providers. You never did. So it's not going to be that much of a change. But you're not going to have any options. If you don't want to go to forensic psychologists and get a custody evaluation. So that's not an option. And the reunification therapy, there's no such thing, doesn't work. So that's not an option. The DBT therapist won't work in the family courts because it's too dangerous. So that's not an option. So I, honest to God, don't know where you're going to get the diagnosis and treatment for your families. However, if and when you do, I'm always available to consult with the mental health people, so you can always help get something set up. I'm also holding general public consults the first week of any month. So, and the scheduling's through my Gold Trees consulting website. So you can go there. You can just schedule on my calendar for the first week of every month. And I'm a full service psychologist, so I can deal with ADHD or attachment or autism spectrum, not just the family courts. Pretty much, look at me, I'm an old guy. I've worked pretty much everything. I've even worked selective mutism. I've had 3 cases of selective mutism. That's a very rare pathology, and I've had 3 cases of it. I know Munchausen by proxy. That's also a very rare thing. So, so yeah, I'm going to be shifting my practice a little bit more broad scale. But family courts, if you're wondering your situation, and we can talk once or twice because I'm not licensed in your state. Once I get licensed in Washington state, they're a member of something called SIPAC, where all the bunch of licensing boards have got together and agreed to recognize their each other's licenses. Like I wish Oregon had said Dr. Childress's license in California. It's not like I'm poaching in Oregon, but they had their motivations. But SIPAC recognizes each other's license for the purpose of online therapy. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do in addition to my DoxyMe office for general consultation, I'm going to get a different platform and just once I'm licensed in Washington and just open up like a little online therapy practice, humanistic, existential kind of stuff. You may not know that. So my specialization out of Pepperdine was in family systems, and you can see all the impact of that. Okay, Murray Bowen, family evaluation. Um, the I'll pull this one up. Mastering Family Therapy by Mnuchin here. Okay, so that's my specialty is family therapy. Mnuchin again, family therapy. I especially like strategic family therapy. Chloe Madonis is my coach. I love Chloe Madonis and her work. And Jay Haley, and they worked with Salvador Mnuchin back in Philadelphia. Salvador developed more of a structural approach of how the family is structured. Chloe Madonis and Jay Haley developed an interesting approach called strategic that has to do with power and how power is controlled, how power is distributed in the family. Symptom confers power. The most powerful person in the family is the one with the symptoms. Okay, so the patient comes in all anxious. I'm so scared. I can't do. That person with the anxiety symptom is the most powerful person in the family because their symptom, their pathology is controlling everybody else. They can't do anything because of this thing, this anxiety or depression or acting out behavior, whatever the symptom is. The symptom confers power in the family dynamics. And so strategic looks at how that power is conferred, and then this is the artistic part of strategic family. Once you understand the power dynamic, you then develop a prescriptive intervention that if the people just do what you tell them to do, it's going to change the power dynamic. And then once the symptom is no longer conferring the power in the family, then it just drops away because it's no longer serving its function, that function in the family. So it's a very elegant approach, but the family doesn't even need to know why it works or what happened. They just need to do what you tell them to do. Um, and so, like the classic example that they gave was a child had a phobia about dogs, and it turns out that father was a mailman. So the prescriptive intervention was for the father to teach the child about dogs and about how to deal with dogs, because there was a estranged relationship between the father and this child, and the child's phobia about the dogs was getting the mother all involved and over enmeshed. And so they separated the mother on the fear of the dogs and gave it to the dad, who is now, the child's fear of the dogs brought the child closer to the father. Well, that wasn't serving the mom's needs anymore. So, okay, you can stop being afraid of dogs now. So that's strategic family systems. So, because I figured I'd be long gone from the planet before you guys ever got around to things. That's what this is. It's a contingent visitation schedule, is a strategic family systems intervention. Okay, that is a prescriptive intervention that changes how power is distributed by the symptom. Now, it looks like a behavioral program. Okay, with a structure, and you monitor the child's symptoms, and if the child's symptoms go up, then you reduce time with the pathological parent. If the child stays normal range, then whatever the court orders are remain in effect. And so basically, right now, if the child acts out, then the targeted parent gets more time. the allied parent. If the child says, "I don't want to be with the targeted parent," then the allied parent gets more time. With the contingent visitation schedule, if the child acts out, the pathological parent gets less time, and the targeted parent gets more time. Well, now that symptom's no longer conferring power to the pathological parent. In fact, it's reversing that. And so now it's no longer serving its function for the pathological, and so they stop creating the symptom. Um, but any mental health professional who knows applied behavioral analysis can do this. Problem is, you don't have anybody who knows that in the family courts. Any DBT therapist could pick this up relatively quickly. I'm available to consult with this as well. And these are two booklets that I developed, about 50 pages each. Each one offers up a little description of the pathology to begin with from a slightly different perspective. But these are booklets that you can give to your therapist, but more so to the court. I want this type of assessment. What type of assessment? I want this. I want this type of remedy. Okay. But now good luck finding a psychologist who can do either one of those. And that's the problem. Is we got really, really bad level of professional practice over here. I'm not an expert. I'm baseline. I'm boundaries of competence. My statement on that is I'm not the ceiling. I'm the floor. Okay, you need to meet at least as much as I know. Okay? If you don't know as much as I know, then you're not competent over here. I'm not an expert. I'm competent. So we're raising the bar. Now, you may not need to know the neurological stuff. I know the neurological stuff, but that's where we'll be headed. And so once we get baseline standards of practice, we'll actually go in further into the neurological stuff about intersubjectivity and about the brain chemistry and about a lot of the neurological networks involved with this kind of stuff. So your psychologists in the family courts in about 10 years are going to be excellent. That's my goal. Excellent. Because I come out of early childhood mental health, which is the top. It knows all the brain stuff. It knows that. Oh my goodness, it knows so much stuff. And so you're not allowed to work 0 to 5 unless you have early childhood mental health specialization. And it's going to be like that for the courts as well. They're going to be the top tier people over in the family courts. But they're all going to be clinical psychologists. And that's how we're going to keep ourselves safe, is by being the best. And so everything we do is just top tier. We're going to go in as pairs too on the diagnosis. We can do that easy peasy on the mental health consultation. And as I wrap up here, that may be something you parents may want to consider. You go to my consulting website on the attorney's resource page. I think it's also on the parent resource page. But you go to the attorney's resource page and you scroll down to the telehealth consultation handout. And that gives you a menu of all the different ways to possibly involve me, which from all the way at the top level is I'm sitting in the session while the assessment or treatment's going on. You need to get proper authorizations on that, but that's a second opinion. And so I can do that. I can be sitting in the session in wherever, anywhere on the planet. If it's got a computer, I can be watching the assessment or treatment session, providing a second opinion, all the way down to various other ways of consulting with the mental health people, all the way down to just simply giving out my booklets. This booklet I wrote just to give out, like, to all the legal professionals, judges, minors counsel, GALs, parenting coordinators, therapists. So this is kind of your basic here describes. What I did in this was I just used quotes from the literature, because you see me doing that all the time. So I went directly to the quotes from the literature to educate people, and then I just inserted like the transitional sentences from one quote to the next and kind of organized them into categories of description. So between the three of these books, I think you'll have maybe a chance to educate some of the mental health people. Patient should never have to educate the doctor about the pathology. That's just fundamentally wrong. So if you're having to educate your doctors or your mental health person about what the pathology is, that just indicates just how bad the situation you find yourself in. So you can get them over to me. If your mental health person wants to set up a consultation with me, they can go to my consulting website. They can get onto my um, schedule. And if they do it on their own, they're going to be paying my fee. But if they do it on your based on your request or something, you'll be paying my fee. But so they'll pay it and then you pay them back on that. But that's an option for you as well. That they can just go straight to that. If I don't know who specifically is involved, then there's no breach of confidentiality. And this is such a patterned pathology. For the most part, I spend all hour talking at them. I don't need very much information. For the most part, the information I need is how many children are in the family, what are their ages and genders, how long ago was the divorce event, and then what are the kids' symptoms? Do we have a full breach to the attachment bond? And are we looking then into a persecutory delusion and false attachment pathology? So what are this kind of the current symptoms? But once I get the pattern, are we in the narcissistic dad pattern, which has a higher spousal abuse? Are we in the borderline mom pattern that has a higher false allegations of abuse? And then where do we fit into that? There are, I'll wrap up here, but there are four types of relationship in the family, and they depend on gender of the parent, gender of the child. Two are cross gender relationships. Those are the high affection bonds. That's father daughter, mother son. Two are the same gender bonds. Those are the values and identity bonds, father son and mother daughter. And so if you have a daughter, she's going to be on the high affection bond with the dad. She's going to be on the same gender values and identity bond with the mom. Then, when we put a pathological parent in either one of those roles, we can begin to see how that's going to distort the child. So a father and a daughter alliance against the mother is your classic incest pattern. That's a special relationship between the father and the daughter that excludes the mother. That's psychological incest. With the father and the son against the mother, that's going to have a high spousal abuse feel to it. The father is likely going to weaponize the child. You might have the mother making police calls to the police coming out because she feels threatened by the adolescent son or things like that. So, father son bond has a higher spousal abuse feel to it. So, based on the gender pieces, there's a lot of information about the nature of the pathology because it's a trauma pathology. It's a pattern. It replicates pattern. Once you understand the patterns, oh my God, it's so easy to see. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up my Sunday morning coffee. Thanks for joining me here. And so you can look forward to throughout the next couple of weeks. I'll just be putting out like little short series of just this and that little juicy bits of information. I'm calling them my fireside chats. All of them are going up to my YouTube, and so there'll be a little YouTube place where you can find all of these chats and discussions. So with that, I hope everyone has a happy Sunday and as we move into August. So take care, everybody. Bye bye.